The U.S. is terrified of a war with China, but is the threat of war more powerful than the war itself? Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. I am so happy to say U.S.-China relations are on the mend, thanks to Biden and Xi finally meeting face-to-face in San Francisco. A lot of great things came out of this meeting, the best being America's top diplomat's face when Biden went off talking points and called Xi a dictator.
Mr. President, after today, would you still refer to President Xi as a dictator? This is a term that you used earlier this year.
Well, look, he is. I mean, he's a dictator in the sense that he is the guy who runs a country that is a communist country that is based on a form of government totally different than ours.
I love that so much. Now, I know some of you watching might think I'm being facetious about this meeting being such a success. You couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, first of all, Xi Jinping promised that he might help stop the flow of fentanyl precursors from China to the U.S. And all Biden had to do to get Xi to make that huge commitment was to lift sanctions on an element of China's Ministry of Public Security, which is involved in Uyghur genocide and organ harvesting. But the wins don't stop there.
China and the U.S. have agreed to resume military communication to help ease rising tensions between the two superpowers.
Mr. Biden said they agreed to resume high-level military-to-military communications, and he said clear and direct contact was necessary to avoid accidents.
That is great news, and avoiding accidents is important. China has increasingly been performing dangerous maneuvers against the U.S. military. In October, this Chinese jet flew within 10 feet of an American plane over international waters in the South China Sea. And back in May, also above the South China Sea, this Chinese jet buzzed a U.S. plane, making the whole thing shake. You see, if there were an accidental collision and someone died, that could spark a war by accident. This is something I've been seeing talked about since China canceled military-to-military communication last year, after former Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan. An accidental war. That's why it was so important to restore military-to-military communication. The Wall Street Journal says the U.S. wants to avoid a war with China that would be destructive for both countries and the world. The restoration of military-to-military communications, which China has resisted for months, is a useful step forward. And if the U.S. has to make some concessions to get that, well, it's worth it. We don't want an accidental war. The problem is, that's stupid. This is just giving the CCP a carrot to use against the U.S. to get concessions. Take the sanctions Biden removed to get fentanyl help. According to China expert Matt Turpin, the next time something happens in the relationship that Beijing doesn't like, the counter-narcotics cooperation will be canceled, flows of precursors will accelerate, and the price of restarting the talks and reducing the flow will be the further relaxation of sanctions on Beijing for human rights abuses. That same tactic will be used for military-to-military communication. So we shouldn't give them anything for it. If China doesn't want our militaries to talk, then fine. But Chris, I hear you say, we need to prevent an accidental war with China. Countries don't get into accidental wars. It's not like stubbing your toe or eating too many nachos. A decision is made to go to war. Leaders might miscalculate their chances, but countries don't just oopsie-daisy themselves into one of the most destructive human acts imaginable, especially nuclear-armed countries. As Matt Turpin says, Beijing does not believe that the United States and the PRC will accidentally start a war with one another. Xi is certain of his control of the PLA and does not believe that the U.S. is planning to attack or invade the PRC. From the PRC's perspective, the only way a conflict will start between the U.S. and the PRC is if Xi directs it to happen. And right now, I don't think Xi is looking to start a war. China's economy is in the dumps. People can't find jobs. And perhaps most importantly of all, Xi knows anyone he appoints to lead China's joint military forces would become the most powerful man in China and could easily stage a coup against him. So the Biden administration needs to understand it is in a position of strength, not China. The U.S. does not need to make any concessions to a communist regime that, may I remind you, uses rape as a form of torture. Now, I have a video I want to show you, but first, China Uncensored would not exist without your support. If you contribute even $1 an episode, you'll be helping us beat YouTube demonetization and censorship. Check out patreon.com/China Uncensored. And as a thank you for your support, I'll answer one of your questions on the show. Today's question comes from Renee W. How is China not one of the least communist countries in the world if they don't allow charities to help alleviate the suffering of people at the bottom? That is in reference to this episode where I talk about how China is cracking down on, yes, charities. So here's the thing about communism. It's not about helping the downtrodden. It's about stealing. I made a joke once to a friend who was a real deal radically trained Marxist. He's not a Marxist anymore. I said, communism is about killing people and taking their stuff. And he said, no, that's not what we're taught. We're taught that that stuff is our stuff. Think about how twisted that is and dangerous. Marx said the communists disdain to conceal their views and aims. They openly declare that their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. It is the complete, violent destruction of a society. And it turns out when people who are really good at killing get into power, they're not actually the greatest humanitarians. Thanks for your question and your support, Renee. And now, for that video I want to show you. YouTube is getting crazy with censorship, especially in the lead up to the 2024 elections. That's why, in order to talk about things that YouTube considers too sensitive, I've created a new show called Deep Thoughts While Gaming, where I talk about things YouTube might otherwise flag. The latest episode is about Baldur's Gate 3, but it's really about identity politics and gender identity. Check it out and let me know what you think. Click on this video and click that orange button to support China Uncensored on Patreon. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.